In honor of today's game and the long, proud tradition of narration provided by guys with southern accents, I thought I'd try a little narration myself. Way out west is this game studio. Studio I want to tell you about. Studio by the name of Supergiant. Supergiant Games. Yeah, that's not gonna work. Anyway, Supergiant Games is an indie studio, nowadays more well known for the hyper-popular Hades series. But that wasn't their first project, not by a long shot. Supergiant had a long list of games that came out before they really struck big and lived up to their names with Hades. Their very first project was Bastion, a forerunner in the indie game boom of the early 2010s, along with Minecraft, Super Meat Boy, and others. For the past 10 to 15 years, I've heard no end of praise for Supergiant and their games, so I figured I'd play through their back catalog and give you guys my thoughts as I go through. Why? Just kind of felt like it. Bastion is an isometric third-person action game. In it, you play a kid named... Kid. He one day wakes up to find that his homeland of Caelondia has been struck by a calamity known as... the Calamity. Kid fights his way through the remains of the people and places he used to know and eventually stumbles into a bastion called the Bastion, a floating island meant to serve as a place from which the survivors can rebuild Caelondia. At first, the Bastion's only other inhabitant is its creator, the old man Rux, who also serves as our narrator for the game. Yeah, Bastion has a narrator. And I hope you appreciate Rux's dulcet southern tones because you're gonna be hearing them a lot in this game. He begins narrating literally as soon as you start playing, and he'll comment on what you're doing throughout the game. More on that later. When Kid arrives at the Bastion, Rux tasks him with recovering some MacGuffins that can help get the machine to full power. So now we have our setup. Kid goes down to somewhere in Caelondia, fights monster hordes in search of the MacGuffin, gets it, and brings it back to the Bastion. Not a lot of deviation from that formula. You'll mostly be going through rather linear levels and fighting. About the levels, well, like I said, they're very linear, a bit too linear for my taste. You have a few collectibles here and there, but the stages mostly just feel like hallways and arenas for you to fight in. Speaking of fighting, the game's combat is pretty simple to learn. You have access to two kinds of weapons, melee and long range, and also a secret skill using one of your weapons, which uses up a limited resource. You have two defensive options, a dodge roll and a block with a shield. If you manage to block an attack at just the right time, Kid will deflect it back at the enemy, causing damage and making them recoil for a bit, leaving themselves open. Not every attack can be blocked though, so sometimes it's best to dodge. Enemy design is pretty good, no singular enemy stood out as super annoying, and the game is smart about spawning different kinds of enemies together to create some challenging encounters. There are bosses, but most are just beefed up regular enemies. Like I said, the combat is easy to learn, but it manages to stay fun throughout due to some punchy sound design and a variety of weapons. Nothing mind-blowing, you have like a slow but strong weapon, a fast but weaker weapon, a weapon with long reach, you know the drill. I have two problems with the way the arsenal is handled here. One thing is, oftentimes you'll get weapons in the middle of a level, right? So you'll go into a stage with a loadout you like, but then oops, sorry, you gotta switch out for this new weapon that you still don't really know how to use. If you get lucky, maybe the level will have a designated spot where you can switch, but a lot of the time, you're just not gonna have a choice. So the game forces you to use these tools instead of naturally encouraging experimentation. This is only compounded by the number of weapons relative to the number of stages. It felt like every other level I unlocked something new, which is cool, but having to give up a weapon I liked for one I didn't know took a bit of the fun out of it. Also, when I finally had all the weapons, I was at the end game. There is a New Game Plus mode, as well as unique challenges which range from simple to extremely frustrating, but if you're not interested in doing a completionist run, you're gonna feel like the game is giving you too many tools and not enough time to learn and enjoy them. I would have preferred if, instead of being forced to use the weapons, maybe you could find their schematics or whatever in the level and choose which ones you want to build in the Bastion. Speaking of the Bastion, once you complete a level, you'll get one of the MacGuffins and teleport back. You'll then place the MacGuffin in a monument which will unlock another structure in your home base. Don't get the wrong idea. While the game does have a bit of a base building mechanic to it, there's enough MacGuffins that it's not like you're gonna have to choose between one structure or the other. It's more a matter of which one you want first. There's an arsenal that lets you change weapon loadouts, a distillery that gives you different drinks that act as upgrades, there's a forge where you can upgrade your weapons, so on and so forth. Oh, a fun fact. Supergiant's founders, Amir Rao and Gavin Simon, used to work in EA's Command & Conquer series before leaving to form their own studio. It's probably where this whole mechanic came from. You can also find other survivors in the levels and bring them to the Bastion, and one thing the game excels at is creating this feeling that the kid in particular, but the Bastion as a whole, are growing stronger as you progress, and this is done without making the game feel too easy. Speaking of which, difficulty is variable. Like I said, you can equip different drinks that give you buffs, but there's also idols. The way it works is, when you build a shrine, you unlock idols for levels. They make the game harder in some way, be it by making enemies stronger, faster, whatever. But in return, you get more money and more experience points. The more idols active, the bigger the bonus. As soon as they were available to me, I played with about 2 or 3 idols active at all times and found the game to be pretty challenging. So Bastion is really only as tough as you want it to be. Make the game easier and scrape by with the bare minimum, or step up to the challenge and be rewarded with loads of money and XP. I appreciate the system. It's more in-depth than just your bog standard difficulty selection, though that is still here. Anyway, that's more or less all I had to say about how Bastion plays. Let's talk for a bit about how it looks and sounds. The game has that steampunk aesthetic that was all the rage back in the early 2010s, but that I personally never found that appealing. Thankfully, the sort of storybook art style the game has makes everything much more palatable and gives the game a very dreamlike feeling, especially with the way the levels form around you as you walk through them. About the audio, the soundtrack just straight up rules. You've been listening to it throughout this video, very folksy and country with a lot of acoustic guitars and woodwind instruments. People who prefer electronic OSTs probably won't like this very much, but I sure did, and besides, you have to at least give them points for originality. Continuing about the sound, let's talk about arguably Bastion's most recognizable element, Rux's narration. As I said, the guy starts narrating as soon as you start playing, and he continues commenting on what you're doing throughout the game. Find a new enemy, Rux comment on it. Find a new gun, Rux comment on it. Fall off a cliff, Rux comment on it. Clever idea, but sometimes it feels like he's commentating just to fill up space. I think the reason the narration is even there is twofold. First, just to fit in whatever lore they came up with for the game's world, and second, to add to the rustic fairy tale feel of the game. This isn't a story that's actually happening as we see it, this is a tale being told by a character. I appreciate that, but the problem is they don't really do much with it. You see, the cool thing about first-person narrators like Rux is that they can be unreliable. You can wonder just how much of what they're saying is true and how much of it is colored by their own biases. That doesn't really happen here. Rux is more or less omniscient and never really lies in his narration. Besides that, there's just the issue narration in games usually has, which is that when you're knee-deep in monsters just trying to stay alive and dodge attacks, the last thing you want is some guy in your ear going on about how this here farmland used to belong to Bongus Jawsome and his boys, Bimmy and Jammy. That said, his voice actor does a pretty great job, and he kinda has to. His performance hard carries the game's story since he's pretty much the only character to speak. Yeah, not a lot of voice actors in this game, probably due to a lack of resources, which brings me along to a more general point about Bastion. Playing through this game, I kept thinking back to Supergiant's history. This is the studio's first game. The founders had quit their jobs working at the EA salt mines just a few years prior, and everybody was hungry for a hit. They had nowhere near the manpower or budget that AAA games had. These were just a few people trying to make a good game, and a lot about Bastion makes that clear. This game feels like a great band's first album, if that makes any sense. A lot of the time, a band's first record is very solid, people can recognize a distinct style, but a lack of resources, experience, or both causes the final product to not really flesh out the unique ideas presented to their fullest potential. That's more or less how I feel about Supergiant's inaugural effort. Don't get me wrong, Bastion by itself is a good game, just like the Beatles' debut is a good album, but in both cases, I know it's not the best they got. It's just that Bastion never really becomes more than the sum of its parts. I can appreciate it for being a well-made game with very few glitches and a fun gameplay loop, but I can't really bring myself to call it revolutionary or mind-blowing. That said, it does come recommended if you're looking for an isometric action game with RPG elements. And don't feel like playing A Link to the Past. Well, those are my thoughts on Bastion. The game sold extremely well when it came out, helping ensure the folks at Supergiant could keep the lights on a bit longer, and I frankly couldn't be happier. The developers weren't done though, and just 3 years after Bastion's release, they put out their sophomore effort, Transistor. I'm excited to try it out and see how Supergiant evolved. Eventually. I'll get to it, promise, but for now I want to check out some other stuff first. You see, a hyper-popular film franchise just recently had its 40th anniversary, and I think it's about time I talk about it. Next up, an overview of the Back to the Future trilogy. Oh, and also, before I forget, I recently opened up a page over on Backlogged, which is basically Letterboxd but for video games, and without all the BPD e-girls. I can't guarantee every game I play will get its own dedicated video review, but I'll try to write up my thoughts on whatever it is I'm playing over there. So if you want to get even more of my opinions, go check it out. Link is in the description. In any case, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I really enjoy reading what you all have to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.